Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the My Football Writer YouTube channel, and welcome back to Nodge Spotlight. It's myself, Freddie Humphrey Wakefield, and Will Grant here with you again to sort of give you a bit of a reaction this time around on Nodge Spotlight. Usually, we do sort of a weekly preview and catch up of what's happened, but there's nothing to preview anymore, and we've already sort of done a catch up of the season now, but we'll go into the sort of the biggest news since the season ended. An interview from Ben Knapper, which happened earlier. Well, I'd say earlier in the week. It's a new week currently. It's a Monday as we film this. It happened sort of late last week. Sort of talking about next season coming up. Said some pretty big things regarding the football club and sort of the summer to come. But yeah, we'll gloss over that in this video. But first things first, Will, how have you been? What's been going on with you? And really, just before we sort of do a deep dive into it, what are the sort of thoughts on Napper's words?
Yeah, mate, I'm very well, thank you, and I hope that's the case with you. Yeah, I think Ben Knapper probably came into this interview, and I think he probably needed to deliver a bit more of a hard-hitting message this time. It feels like in his past interviews, as of late recently, he's been a bit conservative. Really, he hasn't really said too much alarming stuff to kind of like make us either chuffed or make us really angry as such. So I think definitely we found out some more interesting stuff this time as well. But I just want to say before we go and kind of analyze it as such, I think the questions which Paddy in particular asked, obviously Ben Knapper, I thought they were absolutely brilliant. So obviously fair play to Paddy before we start, because those questions was very, very firm. I thought it was very, very fair as well. And I think we definitely learned some new answers as well. But yeah, it just felt like to me, like me immediately, mate, that like the tone of the interview was much, much more different compared to his last. And we kind of felt like we learned out a few more stuff than kind of what we kind of used to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it did seem that way, didn't it? He was a lot more sort of formal in his words, a bit more harsh maybe on sort of what's been going on, and a bit more sort of speaking the truth as such. It seemed in that regard. But the sort of the first really big thing that came out of it was that Jack Wilshere will not be Norwich's head coach. If they were to have made the decision on it, he is not going to be the man who is going to replace his the man he was assistant of in Johannes Hofsorup. So that was sort of the biggest thing, really, and that to me was the right call. I think that made a lot of sense from my standpoint. What's the point really in sort of replacing someone who didn't have much experience in the first place in Torup, and and then people sort of used that. What fans were using it as a sort of the main criticism of that, he had nowhere near enough experience. He was a bit out of his depth. But then you bring in Wilshere, whose only first team experience is being his assistant for about 2/3 of the season. So that, to me, I think that was the complete right decision to take, and Norwich should look externally for whoever it may end up being. But what did you make of that in terms of Wilshere is not going to be the head coach of Norwich? And it looks as if after that decision, there's been quite a lot of reports that he's actually left Norwich now. So clearly he felt he was ready to make the step up, but Ben Knapper didn't think that.
Yeah, I would kind of say that my heart wanted it to work for Jack Wilshere, but probably not so my head. I definitely had some reservations about it. Look, I think across the two games, we saw some nice stuff from Wilshere. I thought that Cardiff game, he had some nice ideas about how to break down a low block, and I thought that was definitely executed brilliantly, despite Cardiff being very, very poor that is as well. But yeah, I still found, I thought the way how he managed to create quite a flexible shape in and out of possession against Borough and Cardiff, and kind of using McConnell as like a right back at times in possession, then obviously moving him to more so like a right centre half, obviously out of possession. I thought that was quite a nice concept. So I think that does show some tactical innovation there for sure. But I think with the current trajectory which Norwich are currently at right now, and obviously the aspirations which Knapper obviously has now outlaid, it just felt like quite a big risk to go for Wilshere. Obviously, I would have absolutely loved it for if it worked for Wilshere, but I just think now, obviously, we now heard that like the target is to get playoffs next season. right now that feels so far away, obviously. But look, a lot can change in a transfer window as such. But yeah, I personally think we needed to get a better, probably more so a coach which has probably more experience in England, probably, and someone as well who's got a very good record of developing young players. Because it feels like now, obviously, with the likes of Signs, Sargent, all departed likely anyway, and Norwich don't really have too much reliable talent to kind of go to next season that and they can deliver, right. I think maybe the only player next year that I'm 100% confident that I know is going to deliver 10 out of 10 across a 50-game season probably is Callum Fisher. And I think although that's great, and Callum Fisher is obviously a very talented player, you can't really be building a core of your side run a right back personally. So that's why I kind of want next season for us to really try and get in a very good coach who's got a good reputation in the game and can develop these players. Look, I still personally think, obviously, we're going to touch on it later as well, but I still do think the board have been a bit too ambitious for where we are. I think if you look at other teams in and around us, kind of, I think they've got like a decent core at their disposal of players. And it just feels like right now we've got a mix of players who have showcased their ability to be good players, but it just still just doesn't feel like, for me anyway, that like this squad is only reliable as a whole unit. And that is why I want to try and get in a coach who can try and almost like rectify that and kind of bring everyone together, really. But look, we'll see what happens. But for me, I do think there's probably a bit too much ambition from the board, and I think we have to be a bit more realistic where we are, because I think just to go in and expect another player push next season is very ambitious for me. I just think there needs to be some more core foundations that should have been built in order to kind of reach that target. And for me right now, I feel like we're a bit too short.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I was going to ask you, sort of after Napper's words. He said that the reputation of this club is to always be in the top six, and sort of is that accurate based off how where Norwich have been the last sort of 2-3 years? But you've pretty much already answered it. That they aren't really, they've not sort of been that competitive side who look as if they're going to be in the top six all season. Maybe there was the season prior to this one where Norwich ended up in sixth, but they just about scraped in there. Really, they were lucky that sort of the teams below them didn't have enough consistency, which not even Norwich had. They never, were comfortable as such around the sort of top six with David Wagner. The year before with Dean Smith, they were in there, but just really poor runs of form cost Dean Smith his job, and then Norwich completely sort of just fell apart. So no, it seems as if over the last few years, Norwich haven't deserved to be in those playoff places, and the league table ultimately doesn't lie. Norwich finished in mid-table, and it's where they belonged because it's where they were the whole season. They didn't get into the top six once, but then you look at that in that regard, and sort of how Johannes Torap viewed it especially toward the end of the season. There were comments that were sort of brought back up of him at the start of the season, saying that a club of like Norwich should always be aiming for the top six. But then near the end of the season, when he was then asked about what Zoe Webber had said about, well, the aim was always playoffs and we've not achieved it, he was asked that by Chris Gorham, and then that revealed that maybe that wasn't communicated all too well internally, because he seemed quite sort of bemused that was the point and that was what the aim was. So in terms of what Ben Knapper said just recently in this interview, he was quite firm in his defence that that was the objective and that's what was communicated. But at least to the fan base, it didn't seem like that was really the main point at all. The main point of Torap's appointment was, look, we've got a manager here who will give you a identity of play that you can be proud of and associate yourself with, and that you can be happy to be a Norwich fan with us playing a certain way. But then come near the end of the season, they get rid of that project completely, albeit results were very poor, but they completely give up on this point because they weren't high enough in the league table. But Knapper defended himself. He said, well, that was what the aim was. But for us as fans, that didn't really feel like that was conveyed all too well, really.
No, no, absolutely, mate. And I think what I felt in the summer was when top six was mentioned, it felt more of like an ambition. Whereas in recent weeks, after it's been communicated, it feels like it was more so a target. So immediately, it just screened a bit of confusion from the outset, really. Maybe due to Ben Knapper's quite light-hearted tone, he doesn't really get maybe his points across that accurately in terms of how he kind of conveys himself as such. But I definitely think how he obviously communicated in the last press meeting. I definitely think he really outlined his thoughts there. But I my overall thought process with this, if Norwich deserve to be in the top six, like automatically, I don't know really. Look, I know I've got such a great record at this level, and obviously I do get that argument to it. But also in the last 2 out of 3 seasons, we have finished in the bottom half of the table, and that is completely acceptable for me. And even the season when we kind of break into the playoffs, we were literally probably in like a dogfight relegation, probably maybe towards like last winter time as well in like 2023 as well. So it hasn't all been plain sailing really. I just personally think, I don't know, maybe if it's arrogance as such, I just think the board maybe have been a bit too ambitious with kind of where the squad is at. A lot of thing that I kind of got from that press meeting as well was that he kept saying about the strength of his playing group as well. And although I do agree with that, we've got some really, really good individual players, obviously Sargent, Nunes, and obviously Signed, etc. But it feels like in terms of a whole collective team, obviously you can't say to the media that our team was poor and everything like that. But I was generally kind of surprised about how he almost reaffirmed how good this squad is to an extent, because it feels like to me it needs a lot of open heart surgery still as well. So I just think when you consider as well the likes of teams coming down and obviously the teams coming up like Birmingham, etc., I don't think we have a given right to be in the top six whatsoever. It can be a target, it can be an ambition, that's great, but I don't think we should be kind of put into a conversation where this is a top six club. Obviously, I guess when you maybe like working it every day, for example, and you see its potential, then maybe you kind of do get the mindset. But the fact of the matter is, mate, we've had an underperforming group of players now for the last 3 seasons. I know maybe people will argue getting playoffs, obviously, last season was a very, very good accomplishment. But at the end of the day, Wagner's target was for us to get promoted. So actually, was it a great job in theory? Look, yeah, I personally just think Norwich. It feels like almost like Napper doesn't want to kind of maybe like give the fan base too low ambitions. Really, I just think he wants to try and keep everyone on side. Really, but in reality, for me anyway, I think it's absolutely critical that we start to build some really good foundations again. Because for me, as I said earlier, it just feels like the kind of playing group right now is just so muddled, really. And I feel like it's going to take us another season again to really try and get those guys playing again. But obviously, Napper thinks that a new head coach can get an immediate reaction. Then fair play. But for me, I just can't see it, mate.
Yeah, no, it's going to be very difficult. I think, as you just touched on there, with the playing squad that Norwich have got at the moment, before anyone has left and anyone's come in, no, it's a very talented group. You know, you mentioned the 3 there of Nunez, Sargent, and Sainz. They were sort of the 3 that Napper spoke about himself in terms of, you know, players that obviously the club want to keep. You know, he said that Norwich don't have to sell to buy players, as I think that's the bin men or a mega motorbike going on outside on my road. So apologies if you can hear that. But maybe it's Ben Knapper trying to disturb my words. Who knows? But no, I think what you said there with the 3 of Nunez, Sargent, and Sainz, of course, no Norwich fan wants to lose them, and perhaps with the model Norwich have had the last however many years of needing to sell their best assets to bring in other players, you know, I think, you know, it seems like that's maybe an inevitability. But, you know, we know from Napper's words and the Atanasio family words that Norwich are in a position where they don't need to sell to bring in new players. So that's obviously important. But he sort of he expressed his urge in order to keep Nunez. There were comments about trying to keep Sargent, and of course it's a big year for him coming up with a World Cup in his home country in about a year's time. And then Borja Sainz, there wasn't too much said about him really. Looks like he's most likely going to depart, which of course is a shame, but it's to be expected really. And then you look at the summer coming up for us, it needs to be ambitious, really, with a lot of incomings. At least for me, I think there will be further investment here, but Norwich need, as you said, you put it perfectly, open heart surgery. This team needs so much more in it to be able to genuinely compete. But then you have to hope it works with whoever this new manager is. But no, on Knapper's words, it's nice to hear that Norwich don't have to sell their best players, but you sort of expect it. And then with the summer coming up, how many signings do you think they need, really?
Yeah, gosh, if I had to count how many signings we need, then I think I'd be here all day, really. But look, I think the major ones for me is I think two defenders is very important for me. I think we've seen glimpses of Cordoba, but I still don't have that almost urge in me to think that this guy's reliable. I still have some reservations there for me. So definitely going in the market, I guess maybe a Duffy replacement, especially as well. But I think the major thing for me is, and I said it all season, our biggest problem has been defensively. Although our defenders have made some errors at times this season, I think the way how we conceded our goals was actually probably just due to our kind of overall team shape, really. And I just wasn't convinced that our whole midfield was actually working well together to keep clean sheets, for example. Look, as I said earlier, and also that is another police car that's just gone past my house as well. So we're literally slapping up. Anyway, yes. In terms of the midfield, I think I've said in previous podcasts as well that I love Jacob Wright. I think he provides so much passing qualities, and he can also really defend as well at times in some situations. But I think we saw it against Portsmouth, didn't we? And I think we saw it in glimpses against Millwall as well. I just don't think he's that guy to kind of be in that sixth role on his own as of yet. I think obviously, if a new manager comes in and he might play with two pivots, and then I think that is probably more advisable. So definitely for me, I'm looking for a CDM in there type who can always complement Wright and be more of like a powerhouse midfielder next kind of right technical qualities. I think that'd be perfect because it feels like, especially all season, we were so passive out of possession, and kind of when we did make those choices to kind of jump with the ball and go for players. At times, I think definitely we actually got it wrong in terms of when to press and when to kind of sit in our shape, really. So for me, I think that's got to be addressed as well. But obviously, as well, I think the forward situations is very, very interesting because I don't know about you, mate, but I've got a gut instinct. I think they're going to sell Sargent, and I think they might make Ante a main nine, and then they might kind of bring in like a backup nine to replace kind of Senach's void on that right hand side and maybe striker position as well. That's my gut instinct. Am I happy with that? Maybe not. I don't think Senach will develop into a guy that's going to take us into a playoff campaign. That's my personal opinion. But look, I've liked some bits of Senach's play in recent times. I think probably from March onwards, so probably from that Blackburn goal he scored right at the death, I think he's definitely improved, I think, since then. So that's all good and very encouraging as well. But for me, I think it all depends on this new head coach, how he wants to play, what players he wants as well. But I just think what we need to see in this next season is, although I don't agree with it, we need to see kind of instant improvement in terms of we can't be heading into Christmas time and we're still mid-table and the kind of mood is a bit negative and stuff. We've been told as a fan base that we should be aiming and striving for top six. Obviously, I don't agree with that, but that's how we're going to judge on it next season. So fair enough. We'll see what happens for sure, mate. But for me, I think recruitment it kind of like just depends on who we actually bring in as a manager, really. I think there's some good players we have right now at our disposal, but I'm just not quite sure they can deliver that 7 out of 10 performances which we need, right? But who knows? They might turn it into the next coming of R9. So we could all be proven wrong.
No, we could. I hope we are for our sake. But no, I do agree with what you said there about Ante Cianats. I think there is a very talented player there, and a player who has come a long way since he joined last summer. So no, he's definitely improved his game in the year he's been at Norwich, but he doesn't really feel like he's the man who will be your main striker and sort of be the man who can get you maybe 20 goals to really, because you need that in a promotion team. You need a goal scorer who is scoring pretty much every other game to give you a genuine chance of being promoted. You look at the 2 seasons we had Teemu Pukki score 20 plus in both seasons, and then he had Buendia providing, over double-digit assists in both seasons, nearly popping up with double-digit goals as well. So you need at least 2 players who are just leading the statistics in assists and goals, which Norwich almost had in terms of goal scorers last season. But the man who had their most assists was Callum Doyle, and he was playing left back or centre half. That's not what you need at all. Like, you need a lot more of that from attacking minded players. But no, for Cianats, really, I don't think he's going to be the main striker, which perhaps may be harsh, but his more effective play has actually come when he's out of position and he's played at right wing. So it's very interesting, really, how that was approached for Cianats.
So you think we're going to go and buy a striker then this summer to replace Sargent? Is that how you see it?
I don't think Sargent leaves unless an MLS team comes in.
No way, really? Wow.
This is my opinion, and people. This is probably the biggest. This is probably the biggest talking point here for people in the comments, maybe. But I can't see Josh Sargent leaving unless he gets a similar offer from the MLS, like Latte Lath. I think if Latte Lath can go to the MLS for 20 million or something along those lines, I think an MLS team will be the only side who will pay that for Sargent. I genuinely don't think he goes unless he's back in America, where he is truly at comfort because he's in his home country. He can spend so much more time with his family, and then he's got the World Cup in America. Then he hasn't got to go anywhere to go and prepare. He hasn't got to make a long flight away, or he hasn't got to worry about where his family is and what they're doing throughout a whole year. So I genuinely only think he leaves if they come in. And given his injury record, I think as well, I don't know if a big European team will want a player like that. I don't know if they're going to want a player who, albeit is brilliant, and when he plays, he gives everything, and he's arguably the best player on the pitch majority of it. I just don't think a European side want a striker like that. It's unless they've got a brilliant medical team who just cure him and make him just Superman. I can't see him going to a European side. I just don't think that they would take the risk. I think he would only go and leave Norwich if it was an American team. I can't.
Leeds?
See, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Daniel Farke knows Sargent's quality. That's why he brought him into Norwich, and I'm sure he'll be delighted to see his progress. But I don't think Leeds need him. I really don't think they need him. They've got Willie Nonto who can play up front or out wide. They have Piru, who ended up top scorer in the Championship, albeit that's mainly because he scored 4 in one game. But any player who can score 4 in one game is good enough. And I think Leeds will probably be a bit more ambitious with the strikers they sign rather than a Championship player. So no, I'll stick by it. I don't think Sargent goes unless an MLS team comes in. So that's just my thoughts. That's my thoughts. It's my genuine thoughts. And if he leaves for a European team, fair enough. Obviously me and the board maybe don't see it the same way. But no, that's my thinking on it. But we've already touched on it a few times here. It's sort of the last thing we'll go on about, but it's perhaps the most important. The next manager. this is huge. If this summer wasn't already the biggest Norwich had, it certainly just became one, because we've already touched. They need a lot of signings to prove that they can be a top six team. Now they need a manager who is going to make them a top six team. There's been plenty of names chucked about. Some serious, some a bit jokey, because I think I saw Paul Lambert at 6-1 in manager odds. So I think someone has requested odds, and maybe a few people have put silly little bets on and whatnot. But no, the main man who was leading the line was Wilshere. It won't be him. So it's now fell to Ralph Hasenhüttl, former Southampton manager, as the favourite. I think that would be a great appointment at Championship level. I think that would be superb. Do I think Hasenhüttl will maybe step down? Potentially not, but I think he would be brilliant. Gary O'Neill has been thrown about. He's done good jobs at Wolves and Bournemouth, albeit, he was sort of let go in both jobs, but he proved his worth, I'd say, over his 10 years there. Maybe perhaps not so this season with Wolves, but and then there's another few names chucked around. There's been a fair few. Daniel Farker was chucked around for a little bit when it looked like Leeds might sack him, but that's not going to happen anymore by the sounds of things. But no, this next appointment is so important, because Norwich are in danger of doing what they have done for the last 4 years. Is they get to halfway through a season with their current manager, it's not working, they sack them, a new manager comes in for that half a season. It doesn't have his own playing squad, doesn't really bring any players in, tries to get them to learn the way in which they play. It takes time, of course, because it always does. They then have a window, sell who they don't want, bring in who they do, and it doesn't work. The manager's sacked, and Norwich bring in a new manager, sign new players, and it doesn't work. So, no, it's this appointment rather is so important, because Norwich are in real danger again of getting it wrong. So it's huge. It's absolutely massive.
Yeah, I totally agree, mate. I think this appointment could define to work or not. I think, especially after this JHT last year, I think people now are probably a bit more tentative about his work and whether he's actually that good. Who knows? We'll see what happens, obviously, because the next appointment is huge. But for me, obviously, I'm going to press you for a name after I finish talking as well, mate. So I'm get thinking. But anyway, I think for me, what I want is I think this club, obviously, we have such a great affinity to wanting to play a very attractive style of football, which is normally a very, very good possession-based game. For me, obviously, I still want parts of that, but I think the biggest thing for me is I just think we need a very, very well-respected coach who can almost, to a degree, just get the best out of his players at every given opportunity. So I'm not saying here when I say I want a very, very good coach and tactician to go and employ Steve Bruce. I'm not saying that. I'm speaking of someone who's a bit more up and coming and has got a very, very good pedigree of working with young players. And I actually wouldn't mind if our play style gets a bit lost at times in order to try and get the best out of our players, for example, because I think if we stick to a model similar to what JHT did, where to an extent we're kind of playing the same way every week and we still look very open and expansive, although I think that's good to the eye and sometimes it can work very, very well, I'm just not sure whether it will work to the same effect as what it probably has done in recent years. I mean, a kind of a theme this season for me especially is that the best teams this season have been promoted with a very, very good defensive approach and have looked very, very good out of possession. I'm not saying Norwich now need to go and park the bus. Absolutely not. I just think if you've got a manager who's a bit more adaptable and can get the best out of players at any given opportunity, then I think for me that should be the way we go down. I'm kind of wanting someone like John Mousinho, someone in that ilk, where I think he showcased, especially in English football, he's showcased in League One. He's got such a great playing style of play, especially on the ball. But also in the Championship, he showcased a new way to win. Right, he went a bit more pragmatic, a bit more direct, and that worked as well. So I just think for now, I think where Norwich's group is at, we don't really have a settled group of players who are proven really at this level. So I think it's really important we get in someone who can develop and mould a very, very good team together to become a very, very good side at this level. For me, we could talk about playoffs, etc., but I honestly, if you were to look at our record in the last 3 years against like top 12 sides in this league, I reckon it'd be horrendously poor. And to be honest with you, it probably is like it feels like in recent years, like we've been okay against the sides who are very average. It's just when we play against teams who give us much more problems, especially in attack, I just don't think our style kind of holds up to it to an extent. So if we can get a bit more of a manager who's a bit more adaptable, maybe a bit more pragmatic at times, I'm okay with that. But as long as we still see some good football within that, I'm happy. But I just think for me, we've got such a big group of young players. We need someone to really, really try and get the best out of them for me. And that is my major thing. So I think my top one criteria for this job is someone that is very, very proven at developing young players and building a very, very good side. Some maybe in the ilk of Carlos Corbrand for me, but obviously that's very hard. I won't be against, even if Hull do set Ruben Sellers, I won't be against that as well, because I think he showcased, especially in his reign at Reading last year, which was absolutely outstanding, by the way. He managed to play a very, very good style of play and managed to get them almost in the playoff conversation as well. And even at Hull, right? Hull was a very, very difficult situation for him, because Hull before were playing at such an expansive manner of football under Tim Volter, but he managed to come in, get hold of the dressing room, and managed to play some decent stuff at times, albeit it wasn't all attractive on the eye. At times they had to grind out results, but I do generally think he's someone there that's got a very, very good coaching pedigree as well. So I'll look forward to see who we bring in, but I just think maybe we should probably prioritize someone who's just maybe a bit more adaptable and someone who's actually a very, very good, talented, up and coming coach. So my number one hope would be John Mousinho for me.
Yeah, no, I can't disagree with what you've said in terms of criteria needed for the manager. I think you've hit the nail on the head completely, because Norwich have got now so many young players who need a manager who can just put their arm around them and give them a talk and sort of tell them what they can improve and maybe what they're good at. And of course, when they come in and teach their style of play, it's gonna take time for it to adapt. But maybe they can have those conversations in pre-season, look at who maybe it's working for quickly and who it isn't so quickly, and then you can look at signings who maybe they know can get in there quickly, and then you sort of see instant results. But that's a very, very difficult thing to do in football, because it's so much easier to say, oh, well, he can just sign players who works and it will work instantly, and players he's already got will have a bit of knowledge of playing styles and the modern way of playing football, so it will all be fine. But no, it's a lot less simple than that. It's going to be difficult, but as I've already said, I agree with everything you've just said about criteria for the manager. But a name is, this is where it gets a bit interesting, because there has been so many names chucked around. But I think for me, I think Hasenhüttl is a no-brainer. I think that would be a brilliant choice. A manager who has proven at Premier League level that he is a good manager. Albeit there were 9-0 losses for Southampton, and it's never great for any manager to lose 9-0. Scott Parker lost his job at Bournemouth because he lost 9-0, but they ended up all right. But Southampton, really, you look at how they competed under Hasenhüttl, I thought they did really well. They established themselves in the sort of lower mid-table of the Premier League. I believe in the COVID year, he had them top of the league after a couple of matches. So, he's a very talented manager who can get the best out of, it was a bit of a mediocre side at Southampton when he was there. They had talent, but, they weren't exactly world beaters. But for me, I think, considering he's not been in a job for a while, I think a step down to Championship level maybe would help him, rather than go straight in at the deep end again at a team who maybe are a struggling Premier League side. I think it would be a bit more sort of fun for him maybe to come down a level and sort of think to just maybe reassess himself and see what he can do with a team in a bit of crisis. Whoever comes in, they're coming into a big project that has got potential, but at the same time, it's potential to sort of go quite wrong. It can turn toxic quite quickly amongst the Norwich fan base when things maybe don't go their way. But no, I think for me it would be Hasenhüttl. I just think that there's a lot of potential there, and he's a very talented manager. But in a way, I sort of contradict myself a tiny bit. I do think Norwich need a manager who is also a little bit of a master in dark arts. I think this Norwich team haven't got enough of it. It's hilarious. We look back at the Watford away match. There was a whole thing of Tom Cleverley going, "Oh, Norwich, just so dark arts, horrible, horrible team. Just wasted all that time." Why didn't they do it again? Why did they never do it again? Because every team who plays Norwich loves to do it. They love to sit deep and just chuck themselves on the floor. And Norwich struggle so much when they play a team like that. Just as you said there, be a bit more adaptable in game scenarios. Have someone who can, if you are 1-0 up, not just trying to gun for it and make it 2-0. Just sit back and be dirty and secure a 1-0 win. But no, a name for me, I'd love a bit of Hasenhüttl. I think Norwich should go for a manager who has a somewhat similar playing style so that it doesn't take a long time for players to learn it. But the decision's not up to me. It's not up to you. It's up to Ben Knapper. But anyway, let us all know who you maybe want as Norwich manager in the comments. What were your thoughts on Ben Knapper's words? Do you think Norwich will keep Nunez, Sargent, and Sainz, or are all three destined to leave? Despite the fact maybe we don't have to sell them to buy some new players. Even maybe say who you want as a Norwich player next season, and let us all know, and we'll give you our thoughts on that. But this has been Nodge Spotlight on the My Football Writer YouTube channel. It's goodbye from us, and we'll see you in the next video of ours.